flock of the wild ones, into the woods and the darkness, rebirth the ways of the ancient ones.
Welcome, dear one, to the Emily Alexina podcast. I'm Emily, and I'm interested in finding and nourishing our highest human potential. I believe humans have much more beauty and goodness to share with each other and with nature, much more than we have expressed in recent centuries, although we have seen glimpses of it. I'm excited about our future. On this podcast, you will hear mine and other stories on themes like motherhood, birth, holistic healing, spiritual healing, education, and farming. Support my work by rating, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. Also consider making a financial donation via the link in the show notes. Music is by Kate Sutherland.
Step by step through the unknown, I'll be your light and you'll be mine. In darkness, let love light the way to feed the soil of changing times.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be doing a deep dive review, summary, and adding my thoughts to the book Horns of the Goddess by Dolores Cannon. This book summarizes 7 lifetimes that are priestess lifetimes, pagan spirituality lifetimes, around like between 400 and 1400 after the Common Era. And there are some very beautiful, powerful stories in here. At the end of the video, I'm going to share a list of books that I recommend that if you loved Horns of the Goddess and this kind of topic and these kind of stories, I have a pile of books to recommend to you, some of which I think are better and more detailed than Horns of the Goddess. So stay tuned to the end of the video to see those recommendations. Now, I do want to start by saying that I first read Hidden Sacred Knowledge by Dolores Cannon, and this book was published beforehand. So this one was published in 2014, and Horns of the Goddess, let me double check, was published in 2023. That's right, 2022, 2023. And my husband and I have read this one quite a bit. We like to pick it up and just go through it and pick up a fascinating story. There are some beautiful stories in here. I love a lot of the like old mystical, esoteric knowledge type things. I'm always searching for what I can do to improve my life in the present. How I can help more people, how I can have more joy and health and freedom in my own life. And I like doing that through these kind of mystical, esoteric, spiritual practices, inner work practices. And at the very end of this book, I just opened it up to a story about a priestess in Atlantis, and I think it's making me realize I need to reread this book again and review this for you guys. So if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. But at the end of this book, the last chapter, chapter 24, is titled Hiding Jesus's Teachings. And it's the lifetime of a woman who is living in the south of France. I'm not sure if they say what year it is, but it's in the first few hundred years after Jesus was alive on earth, present with us. And there were some fascinating things in here. For example, she talked about how Jesus did not die on the cross and how they traveled from Israel to the south of France, and they had parchments and scrolls that they had to hide in caves in the south of France, and that they were being persecuted by the church that was already kind of starting up at that time, and they had to hide these parchments. And eventually she kind of goes on to say that they couldn't build their team of women who were protecting this information, and she was one of the last ones to die. And reading this story, I had like so many emotions come up. Feel very connected to these stories, these people, and that little story got me going. I read this during COVID, so maybe in like 2021, and it started me on a not long journey, I don't know, somewhat of a journey, exploring different books, different research about the Essenes, about the story of Jesus, and different perspectives on it. I also explored lifetimes where I was close to the Essene people, and yeah, just adding that to kind of my repertoire of knowledge and wisdom. So I have a deep curiosity for those storylines. And there's a little footnote at the end of this chapter that says if you're interested in that kind of topic specifically of these like priestess, spiritual women in the south of France, you might be interested in Dolores's book that she's working on called Horns of the Goddess. Or this one was still published, I think, just after she passed. So this was a book that was completed by Dolores Cannon. And I think she says, I'm also working on Horns of the Goddess. So at the time, I emailed Ozark Mountain Publishing to see when is this Horns of the Goddess book coming out? Are they actually working on it? And they said, yes, we're working on it. It should be out in the next year or two. Hang tight. And there it came in 2023. I got this one last year. Yeah, so in 2023. It is on Audible. I have seen that the the recording on Audible is done very well. A lot of the Dolores Cannon books are done quite well on Audible with like different people playing the different voices. I find it just fantastic. My one comment though is maybe on some of them, like what am I listening to? The Three Waves of Volunteers. It's often a man and a woman's voice, which is interesting to have the two, the male and the masculine and feminine. But a lot of the characters are all feminine characters. Like the client being regressed is feminine. She's accessing a female lifetime, and it's a man doing the audio voice, which I find a little weird. Anyway, that's my only comment about that. But I have friends who have listened to this on audiobook. I have a few friends who have listened to this. One of my friends said, wow, this book was amazing. I want to recommend it to everyone, but I'm afraid that my Christian friends or even other people are going to think that I'm weird or I'm into some dark magic. They're going to like cast me out or, think I'm doing devilish kind of work. And it's interesting because this is coming from someone who is into the mystical teachings, who has read all of Dolores Cannon's books. And even Dolores, I'm going to read what she wrote in here previous to the lifetime of Estelle. Now we're going to talk about all the lifetimes today, but this is what Dolores says. In the beginning of this story, when she was describing the horrors of the Inquisition and the callousness of the church, I told her after the session, Brenda, what are you trying to do to me? There's no way I can write about this. They will hang me from the highest tree if I try to tell them about the horrible things the church did in those days. They will never stand for hearing such things about their church fathers. This is the way I feel. There is too much explosive material contained within this story. It is probably the truth about the way the church really behaved, but I feel I must wait a while before I dare write it. I will receive enough ridicule from my other stories as it is. I'm not quite ready to go out on a limb with this one. And so that's why this book was only published after she died. Now, she grew up in I'm pretty sure the south of the United States. She grew up with a Christian education. So she was very strongly still influenced and not brainwashed. That's a hard word to give to Dolores Cannon, but highly influenced by the church still, even at the end of her life in her 80s, even after all the work that she did. This was the hardest book for her to publish, even with all the other mystical books, even with UFO, abduction cases, all the things. I find that really powerful, and it goes to show the influence that the church has had on us. Now, speaking to that, I do want to say, after reading this book, we can have a lot of anger as to what happened, a lot of even rage and unfairness as to what these people were doing in the name of Jesus, in the name of God, what these men mostly in the church were doing. But women, you know, there were women who were also supporting them, and there were a lot of people who could have done something and didn't. And yeah, there can be a lot of emotions, a lot of rage. You know, they erased these incredible cultures. You know, they then went and colonized a lot of the world and eradicated a lot of those cultures and spiritual practices and, you know, religious cultures. And I went through a long time of having a lot of rage towards the church, towards like all of Christianity for it. And I'm kind of coming through that now. And I encourage you to be wherever you are and to really feel into that. But one thing that I have felt, and it's even actually in the book, is nothing is ever lost. It's also mentioned in another book that I will be recommending at the end of the video, The Power of the Magdalene, where they talk about the teachings of the Divine Feminine and Mary Magdalene. And again, they say like nothing is ever lost. You know, I went through a phase of feeling so much grief around just feeling the culture and the practices and the teachings that feel like they've been lost to us. But as we can see with some of these books, they are coming back. If they were thought, if they were practiced, if they existed, their energy, their frequencies are accessible on earth. They are in the land, they are in the water, they're in the stones, they're in the vibrational field of the earth. And I have had some interesting quantum healing sessions myself where I was the client. One where I accessed the lifetime of like a Mongolian shaman nomadic tribe. And their job was simply to find like ley line cross sections on the earth in their area and sit on them and meditate and listen. And so this is a practice that I try to do, especially as I'm talking about it. I realize I have not been doing it maybe too much recently, but especially before my son was born, he's now 2, it was very important for me to be quiet and just sit with the earth and just listen and be open. And so I encourage you that if you feel grief around what happened and you feel grief around these teachings and these cultures being lost, sit openly and be open to hearing what you can do about it, or what you can still learn, or what the earth has to teach you, or what is to be done now. Because every time on earth is different. Humanity is at different, levels of evolution. We go up, we go down. And so wherever we're at, we have to do the best with what we have and with where we're at. That's kind of like my motto. And the more I really ground into that, the more at peace and the more centered I feel. So yes, there's a lot of horror that happened, and I've been studying these horrors. I've been wanting to understand them and see what happened. And again, on the other side, there's more calmness, clarity, a bit more understanding, a lot more compassion and clarity to be able to move forward. And I also want to say that as I read about these books, and as I do even my sessions with my clients, and as I explore all of these things in the quantum field, what are my personal goals? My personal goals are, okay, how does that change how I'm going to live and be with myself in my inner world and interact with others externally? How am I going to raise my children? And what are the practices and community events and things that we want to practice together that can help bring about some of the energetics and intention and harmonious energies and powers back to the earth plane. How can we do that now? So that's kind of how and why I read these books. So in this book, there are 7 lifetimes, and I'm going to go through the 7 of them and kind of share my thoughts about them. So there is the lifetime of the druidess, the first druidess that we meet, a second lifetime of a druidess, The third one is the kind of the longest portion of the book, the lifetime of Estelle, who lived in a duchy in the land of Flanders, which was likely Belgium, and a lifetime of a minstrel in Ireland, the lifetime of a doctor in Alexandria, a lifetime of a girl who saw fairies, and the lifetime of a Greek priestess. And I was reading through the Amazon reviews. This book actually didn't get much, like a big explosion of reviews. It wasn't super, super popular. I feel like it's definitely a niche book. But there was one review where someone said, like, the first half of the book was interesting. The second half, we could have left it, did not need to be published. Just leave it, you know? And I think for someone like me who's interested in the research, I did find it fascinating. Most of these are lifetimes of these people who are not the highest evolved in their cultures. They were not the elders. They were kind of like, I mean, not average, not an average human because of their beautiful practices and their awareness, but they weren't the high elders and masters of their culture. And I feel like you can sense that from the book. I found I have read other books, stories of saints, or even the story of Anna, the grandmother of Jesus by Claire Hartsong, which I'm going to recommend at the end of the video, that have a higher level of clarity, a higher level of love and compassion and understanding, I find in those books. That being said, I still think this is incredibly valuable and also echoes a lot of what is in the other books. Like there aren't many contradictions. It's all similarities, which I personally love as I continue my research in this kind of niche topic. So first of all, let's talk about Karen, who Dolores was working with regularly in 1982, 1983. So I am born in 1989. I think it's wild that these sessions were taking place even before I was born. And that means it took 40 years for them to publish the stories of the transcripts. At the end of the book, Dolores does say that Karen, it's Karen, who in this book gives 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the lifetimes, and also provided lifetimes for A Soul Remembers Hiroshima and Jesus and the Essenes, and which is wild. So Dolores got a lot of material from this woman. She was a true somnambulist. You can tell in the way it's written, which I love, that she takes on certain accents, and she says she has some like ways that she puts her sentences together are very different from character to character. Dolores even says at the end that she went from having like a German accent to a Greek accent when she was talking. So this woman was a full somnambulist. And in my practice, I have had, I think one true deep somnambulist who woke up not remembering a thing of what happened and fully took on the personality when they were under. And it's pretty impressive. Like as a practitioner, it's pretty wild to experience this. And Dolores even says at the end that once Karen stopped working with her and had a family, she ended up denying that any of these sessions had ever taken place. And she completely forgot about them altogether. So it's wild that they are now, published in books. Of course, her real name is not Karen. All of the names have been changed of Dolores's clients. And so this woman didn't really care about what she saw. And this makes me think of like all the people we see walking around, even, friends or people in our community, family members, who don't seem very interested. If we're interested in these esoteric kind of spiritual teachings, they don't seem very interested in them. And we can sometimes think that, they'll never be interested or they've never been exposed to it. But truthfully, they could have had other lifetimes where they were deeply involved in this kind of knowledge and research and teachings and practices. And this is a lifetime where they're not. And sometimes the fact that they have you as a family member or a friend to kind of remind them of some of these things is like their little thread connecting them to that, while they personally don't invest too much time and energy in that kind of work in this lifetime. So that's something to think about, to have a lot more patience and grace and just an open mind and open heart about people and their journeys and their soul journeys, because we absolutely never know. You know a little bit more maybe if you do a QHHT session with them. And even then, not everything is revealed. So Dolores at that time was going back in linear time for the sake of research. She was taking people back in 100-year jumps. And Karen is someone who gave the story of A Soul Remembers Hiroshima, which is an incredible story. And I have a review of that book on my channel. And she also did Jesus and the Essenes. So the first lifetime, she goes to a lifetime of a druidess. Dolores calls them a druidess. Even Karen herself, or the personality, that the entity that comes out, does not say she would call herself a druidess. She says other people called them druids. I would say she says she calls herself a lady of the goddess, or ladies of the goddess. And that's, I think, so those are very much like the Avalonian kind of language, these priestesses, these ladies of the goddess, these priestess of the goddess, of the lady, that they were very deeply connected to. And it's kind of like an entity that represents Mother Earth, but it's very specific to Avalon and that area, that Celtic area. And I also want to say, in those times, there were so many different groups of people practicing these deep spiritual practices in their own very unique ways. There were some people who were more druidic, some people who were more like priestesses. There were people of the earth. In the book here, there's two different characters who reference the old ones who lived in the hills. And I believe, and those are referenced also in Dreaming the Serpent Spear by Amanda Scott. So those could be, I kind of feel they're kind of like the Welsh, very deeply connected to nature, like indigenous people, who are on a whole other level altogether. There were on the Isle of Mona, which is now the Isle of Anglesey in Wales, there was a community of druidic type people, men and women. The priestesses of Avalon were definitely only women, as far as I can tell, and all the stories about them say they were only women. And then in Europe, there were other people as well. There were people in France and Germany, the German territory. Of course, they all had different names in those times. In the south of France, you had the Essenes who were starting to be established. And from what I've read, there was fluidity and movement and exchanges happening between these different groups. I've been studying the Essene people through different stories and sources for a few years now. And from what I seem to understand, they were traveling. I believe that Jesus traveled from the lands of Palestine, Israel, to India, to Egypt, to Britain, and through the French and European territories, through Greece. And so all of these people had some of them who would travel and learn and exchange information between each other. So there were very much distinct groups, but they also were connected and exchanging with each other. I just love feeling into this idea of all these different ways of growing spiritually and living in harmony with the planet that are so different, but seemed to live harmoniously with each other. At least that's what I see. They were kind of like behind all the wars and the power trips and the kind of more Martian Roman things that were happening. So there are a few interesting practices that came out in this lifetime of Karen as the druidess, as the Lady of Avalon. She talked about like spinning in the fields, in the meadows regularly to open up her energy centers and to gain energy. And I've seen this kind of practice of spinning in a few different cultures. There is, I believe, in Sufism, there's like a form of dance where they do turning and spinning and dance. Osho had some spinning practices. And one practice that I have done is the 5 Tibetan exercises. You can look them up on YouTube, which are pretty fun. They're said to be like a great way to maintain health and like spinal health and energetic health. And it starts with spinning. And in this book, she says counterclockwise. So there was healing with putting the hands in the form of a pyramid over the solar plexus to kind of like gather the energy in the solar plexus and direct it. They would gather in group meditation in that she describes with the hands over the solar plexus. I find that interesting, and it's something I want to try in a group with my women while singing or praying for peace on earth, to do this symbol. Maybe I picture like a globe sitting in the middle of us and praying for light and peace and healing and harmony on earth with this at the solar plexus. She talks a lot about protecting yourself with light, because they had to, so this lifetime was probably around, I'm trying to look at the other lifetime. Oh, they said 700s. So they had to protect themselves from the Romans who, when they came into Britain, they were trying to eradicate the spiritual practices of the people to make them less strong, less mentally and psychologically, spiritually strong, and more easier to control, less likely to rebel. So they wanted to wipe all that out. Eventually, they brought in the church and Christianity to have something to give to the people in terms of religion for them to fall onto. And that means that they were trying to eradicate all these kind of priestess, druidic, forest kind of lifetimes. And I can share here that one of the first lifetimes I accessed was of a woman who I would call more of a druidic culture. And I've spoken about her before, but what's important to share today is that they were feeling that their culture was being annihilated, that the Roman type people in the church were after them and wanting to annihilate them. And so they met in like a grove of trees and they were discussing different options. And what they decided to choose was that some of the people would go into the villages and integrate with the regular people and pass down genetic information that way. And others would stay in the woods and continue their practices as long as was possible so that they could be written about in history, because that was really important. And there was like no fear, no stress about it. Just, okay, here's our situation. What do we do about it now? Incredible. Like I've learned a lot from connecting with that lifetime. And after the session, Karen had so much energy that she felt like she had to put her hands and just like channel that healing energy and put it to Dolores. And Dolores had her friend Harriet, who was there helping her, and just like discharge some of that healing energy that she got from connecting to this druidess. So it seemed like it was a very, very highly evolved person. She was vegetarian, which I find interesting. In most of the lifetimes that are in this book, the people are vegetarian. I've gone back to eating meat in the past 3-4 years, so I sometimes find it hard to read things like that. But it does make me curious, and I'm definitely open. Basically, my personal like approach to diet right now is to listen to my body, and my mind would like to go back to vegetarianism. as soon as possible, to be honest. But I don't want to force it, and I want to respect my body and where I'm at. I've had 3 children, and breastfeeding and all of that, and birth and pregnancy takes a lot of energy. It's interesting, actually. So this book kind of goes into the priestess life a little bit more. I'll maybe talk a little bit more about this book at the end, The Mists of Avalon. And she also says that they're vegetarian, but in this book, which is fiction, during pregnancy, the woman does eat meat to sustain her body. So that's, that's an interesting thought. Is it something that we need when we're making babies and we're like doing very earthly bound things? One of the characters, I think it's the Greek priestess at the end of the book, she says, like, if you eat meat, it binds you to the earth. So it's harder to do like spiritual exploration type stuff. And something that was very interesting was during the session, this character could read the past lives of Harriet and Dolores, who were there. So taking the hand and see what they were doing. So she saw the fire. She got really scared kind of seeing the fire that Dolores would have been involved in a past life. So one of her past lives was being at the library of Alexandria when it burned out, and trying to save as much knowledge and as much of the parchments as possible. And this character like saw that past lifetime of Dolores. And the end of the life of this character was very interesting, where she was caught by the Romans. She had basically been tricked to go for a healing in a village, and was caught by the Romans, and then was choosing to focus and shut down the body. And Dolores was writing that was one of her most scary moments in a session. She wished someone else had been there with her, because she felt like it was actually affecting the body of Karen, who is in front of her. And so she had to be very persistent and say, like, nothing will bother you. Like, it's already happened. Let's skip this part and not have it, happen to this body now. But she said the energy in the room was crazy, that like this woman's body was really shifting and shutting down. The breathing was getting really shallow, and Dolores got really scared and skipped over that part. So the next one is the lifetime. This is a client named Bernadine. She accesses a lifetime as Liena. And this was interesting. Dolores spends a bit of time showing how she gets to that place. So Bernadine accesses childhood images and then goes to like her birth scene. And of course, I find the births always very interesting. I'm also a birth doula and of course a mother who has been birthing children. They talk about how she was like slapped by the doctors, hung upside down, separated from the mother, all these horrid things that happened to babies in the 60s. And then Dolores goes, okay, well, what's happens before the birth? Can you access times before the birth? And she immediately has an accent, and she talks about how her mother was a druidic, was a teacher in this priestess kind of group. And again, it's a beautiful lifetime. It does not too long, I guess. And they're not able to really finish it or go into detail because Dolores does not get the opportunity to regress her again, although they stay close friends. The third lifetime is the biggest chunk of the book, a character named Estelle who lived in a duchy in Flanders in Belgium. They don't really say the year of the lifetime in this book, but I'm assuming it's anywhere between 700-800 to even like 1200 AD, because she does talk of the Inquisition, the people who were coming, like organized by the church, and who were torturing people, basically executing people for every and any reason to control and scare the people. Estelle kind of goes into quite a bit of detail about this. And from what I've read, the Inquisition took a lot of power. It was kind of like gaining more and more power around the 1100s to 1200s is when they started like burning people at the stake. And it was just God, like I would not, I would not want to live in those days. Estelle does talk about, I wanted to share this, page 123, the church being the bride. Okay. So Dolores says, well, you once mentioned the Inquisition. Are these priests or what? Brenda, yes, there's a certain branch of Catholic priesthood. All they do is go around torturing people. And it's usually, you see, all types of men are attracted to the priesthood. And so that's why there are so many branches of the priesthood, to accommodate these different types of men. And there's a type of sick men who get their pleasure from hurting things, from hurting either animals or people. And the only time they feel like a complete person, like they are worth something, is when they are hurting something. And so these are the types that are drawn to the Inquisition. Dolores, it doesn't sound very religious to want to hurt people. Brenda, they convince themselves that they're doing it for the glory of God, and they pray themselves into hysteria. Dolores, I've always thought religion was supposed to be doing good. Brenda, it is. Dolores, but to hurt other people doesn't seem right. Let me see if I understand what the Inquisition is. Were they trying to find people who were not obeying the church or obeying the ways of the church? Brenda, yes, they feel that it is their duty to help keep the bride of Christ pure for him, to use their terms. I wonder what they mean. It can mean whatever they want it to mean, whatever is convenient at the time. What do they consider the bride of Christ? They're referring to the church when they say the bride of Christ, and they say they want to keep her pure for her bridegroom, and so they use that excuse for their own reasons. Frankly, if such a notion were true and the bridegroom were to come to earth for a church to take on as a wife, which makes no sense, the Catholic Church would not be it. Whoever heard of such a notion? Yeah, I can see how they're keeping it pure. I can't see how they're keeping it pure if they're hurting and killing. Exactly. That's like staining it. It's interesting, as I read this, I'm realizing I don't know if Dolores had truly ever heard of the Inquisition and what actually happened in those times, or if she's just kind of playing dumb, which she sometimes does to not lead the client on. There's a fantastic little tiny book that's a super quick read. It's called Witches, Nurses, and Midwives, and it's about how the witch burnings and the witch hunts played into our medical system and how it was built, how the role of the nurse came to be, and also how it affected midwifery. It's a fascinating little book that, goes into a lot of detail, quite powerfully, quite succinctly, about how these witch burnings affected all of humanity, right? Because if the midwives are affected, then it affects every human who's born. It's very good. So I highly recommend that little book. So Estelle, we kind of go through her lifetime from her being like 16 to in her 30s. So it's not very long. She does die a pretty terrible death. She goes into quite a bit of detail about like the pagan rituals and ceremonies and even spells that they had. So I would say her lifetime is definitely more of like witchcraft, witchcraft. Like it reminds me of like the Wiccan kind of religion now. She talks about using the pentagram and using it for protection, like imagining the symbol for protection, and also like different colors of it can mean different things. So white or other colors is for protection, and black or muddy colors can cause problems for other people. So she was a servant in a duchy or like a type of mansion, and there was one of the ladies of the house who was higher up than her who would mistreat her, and so she would come back at her and imagine these black and brown pentagrams on her lips or in her over her head, and it would make her talk nonsense and say things that didn't make sense. And so in that way, she's like casting spells and that kind of stuff. She at one point talks about Mother Mary. I want to read this part to you because I wonder what you think of this. Personally, I didn't love this. Okay. So they're talking about the symbology that they use in the church, and she's kind of saying that the church stole some of the pagan symbols and rituals to have more power and control the people. Like they talk about, she mentions how incense was a way to like control people with the mind, with the smells. And as I talk about the church here, and again, as I mentioned before, with the personal journey that I've been on, I don't believe now that it was all evil. I do think that there were some very well-intended people in the church. I do believe in the saints, or like that some of the saints were like really good and highly enlightened people. I think in Europe and for so many years, for hundreds and hundreds of years, it was the only route. So if you were a good person who wanted to do spiritual work, it was the only place you could really do it. So yeah, I don't think it's all bad, but that there was a lot of twistedness and corruption. So Dolores is asking, any other symbology they would use? Brenda, the most heinous of all, even though they will not say it, they know that the Great Mother is the power of the universe, but hers is not a masculine direct power. It's more of an indirect power, like the effect of water on stone. A flowing power, and they know that people will find this and follow it in spite of their teachings. So what they have done, they have taken this symbol to represent this power that people might find and explain it in terms of their church, and exploit it and profane it to make it seem like it has no power at all, or perhaps inferior power to their follower. And this is what they call the Virgin Mary. Dolores. Yes, in our time, she is almost worshipped. She is supposed to be equal to her son. It is like they worship all three. Brenda. Yes, that is the same here. They worship her, but they make her subject to the Father, that she doesn't have any power of her own, but she can use feminine wiles to trick the Father, so to speak, or to talk him into considering being merciful. Oh, this is why they ask her for favors? Yes, and they make her very subservient to the Father, making it seem that the goddess herself has no power. Do you think the story of the Virgin Mary was true, or was it just introduced for this reason? Brenda. I think it was partially introduced for this reason. I think there was a story behind it that got twisted to their own ends, so that they could consolidate their power. For I think what happened was that she who bore Jesus, Joseph, was the father of, and that the first time that they made love, she did not know what was going on, and so she did not realize that she had lost her virginity. She had been told to keep her virginity, and she didn't know what they were talking about. And so she didn't know that she had lost it until several times of making love with Joseph. Or sometime later, she came to the realization that she was going to have a baby. And she knew that only women who were not virgins had babies, but she thought she still had her virginity. And it was due to her being young and not knowing things. And so the church took this and twisted it around so that she was actually a virgin. And it was just a spiritual influence that caused her to become pregnant. They couldn't have it be otherwise, I guess, said Dolores. What about the son, Jesus? Do you have any thoughts on that with your beliefs? He was a servant of the goddess, and he was trying to turn people to the goddess, trying to soften up the Jewish religion so that people could be more acceptant towards the goddess. And he would have succeeded had it not been for the Inquisition. You see, it has been said that after he was killed, his followers were in two different groups. One group was following the goddess in the way that she would be very pleased, and the other group was power-hungry. And the group that was power-hungry made up rules and changed things and consolidated their power and tried to stamp out the other group. I suspect they pretty much succeeded. Had they not stamped out the other group, the church would not exist. There would be followers of Christ, but they would not be grouped into an all-powerful church. They would be in groups worshiping the goddess the way we worship her. So this is a very powerful, powerful passage. I don't agree with all of it, and I think, to me, this goes to show the level of Estelle and where she's at and what she understands, and also perhaps their seclusion relative to other groups in Europe and Britain. She was saying earlier that the church made it so that people were very distrustful of strangers and did not encourage traveling. So most people didn't travel through all of Europe, except really for the church and the lords, who kind of had more power. But all the other people that they were trying to control were not allowed to travel. They were also not allowed to ask questions. They did not have access to the Bible. Curiosity was seen as something that could be witchcraft and work with the devil. And if you had other ideas, like at one point she says, like, if you're wondering about clouds and you start asking about clouds, they're going to come after you and punish you or take you away because you're being influenced by the devil. So I think there's part truth to what she says. I do think the church kind of put some aspect of the divine feminine into the church through Mother Mary so that people had something to turn to that was more of a feminine energy. I believe personally that Mother Mary was a highly, highly, highly evolved spiritual being that would not have had intimacy with a man and not known what was happening. I believe that conscious or light conception is a possibility. From what I've read in the different books, they allude to that being a possibility. And some books go into details about like how that happens, including in Power of the Magdalene by Stuart Wilson and Joanna Prentice, which I recommend. So to me, what she's saying about Mother Mary, it makes her seem pretty naive, to be honest. And then again, what she's saying about the church, that Jesus was a servant of the goddess. That's a really big one too. Estelle's whole view of the universe is basically feminine, that everything comes from the goddess. And it's interesting the way Dolores writes it, that she's still putting capitals on the words God and like he for Jesus. But the word goddess, when Estelle says it, is not capitalized. I think that's interesting. That's an interesting thing that Dolores does. And so in Estelle's view, the goddess is the creator, is the be-all, end-all. And personally, I believe in what I've seen with some of the Essenic writings and channelings from that time period. The Essenes were very much about divine father mother, and I love the way that that's put, like divine father mother as one unit together. And so in that sense, I don't believe that Jesus was only a follower of the goddess and wanted to like take the goddess and replace the Jewish male god with the goddess. I don't believe that that's what Jesus was doing. I think he wanted to bring back the divine feminine principle into equilibrium. I think he worked with Mary Magdalene and they were like a partnership. So that's where I stand with that. And because of that's what I believe, I think that it shows Estelle's naivete a little bit and a little bit of attachment towards her own way of thinking. But that's just me. You know, she talks about the church stamping out any groups that thought differently. In Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, this is talked about. I think of also the Cathars and people in the south of France who were into the Gnostic Christian and mystical teachings and who did not believe that that Jesus had actually died and resurrected. Like there's a whole other storyline and belief system there. And there was a group of the church who was working, again, like I said before, to annihilate all of this. So So in that way, she's right. And you can read, I highly recommend the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. There's a lot of different books about that. And also the Gospel of Judas is kind of an interesting one. So I highly recommend all of those books. And right now I have to hop on another call. So I'm going to maybe leave this as a part 1 of Horns of the Goddess, and we will get into part 2 another day.
Follow the walk of the wild ones into the woods and the darkness. Rebirth the ways of the ancient ones whose tracks were washed away in blood. It falls to us now to open up and taste beyond what we've been fed. Take up the phoenix fire of cleansing, change to light the path instead. Follow the walk of the wild ones into the woods and the darkness. Rebirth the ways of the ancient ones whose tracks were washed away in blood. It falls to us now to open up and taste beyond what we've been fed. Take up the phoenix fire of cleansing, change to light the path instead. Step by step through the unknown, I'll be your light and you'll be mine. In darkness let love light the way to feed the soil of changing times. Step by step through the unknown, I'll be your light and you'll be mine. In darkness let love light the way to feed the soil of changing times. Follow the walk of the wild ones into the woods and the darkness. Rebirth the ways of the ancient ones whose tracks were washed away in blood. It falls to us now to open up and taste beyond what we've been fed. Take up the phoenix fire of cleansing, change to light the path instead. Step by step through the unknown, I'll be your light and you'll be mine. In darkness let love light the way to feed the soil of changing times. Step by step through the unknown, I'll be your light and you'll be mine. In darkness let love light the way to feed the soil of changing times.